market benefiting them. But wonderful. Well, I'd like to get going just for the people that have already joined us. And I actually can't see the list. I think Meg can over here. So especially past clients and friends and family of ours, I appreciate you joining here today and taking time to discuss really what's happening in Bend housing this summer. It's been a wild year, and there's a lot happening. So, to start, let's start here. It's been a wild ride, and just a few months ago, we were doing these webinars, having meetings with our clients, simply trying to convince them that the sky was not falling. It was a very dynamic time, and certainly a pandemic is something that no one had dealt with in real estate. The last major pandemic in the US being 100 years ago, this is not something that was in our playbook. We didn't have a measuring, a ruler for how to judge what was happening. But the data that we were seeing was fairly strong in the sense that all the fundamentals of housing and real estate and Bend were in good working order, from our economy to our job base to our fixed supply, et cetera. And it looked to be a quick recovery, but it was an awfully tough couple months. But what we're seeing right now is nothing less than a boom. And some people begrudge it, some people are all in favor for it. I'm somewhere in the middle. I like regular housing markets that are more reliable, where people can make methodical decisions. But to describe what we're seeing right now as anything less than a boom would not give it justice. So it is absolutely unprecedented. And I'm going to dive into the factors that are driving this boom. But I think before I get to Bend itself, we need to take one step back and talk about the overall economy very briefly and how that ties in, because what we're seeing right now is unprecedented. So let's first start by discussing national trends, specifically unemployment. So the stat that I have here on the left is a stat by the Bureau of Labor Statistics showing that for the first 3 months of the year, we were at 3 to 4% unemployment, very strong. Then obviously COVID-19 hit, and we dealt with something that we've never dealt with, and we had a 10% jump in the unemployment in 1 month. This is where the gears stopped. Everyone was trying to figure out which way was up. What's been encouraging is the pace of the rebound on the recovery of those jobs, and how quickly that's coming down. So month over month, that unemployment rate is dropping 1 to 2%. Obviously, there's all kinds of things that are going into that, where it's tough to file for unemployment, and some of the jobs that are being brought back are only temporary or at a lesser wage, and we could go into that for a long time. But we are seeing a lot of jobs. And in fact, the consensus for the jobs report in June was about 3 million jobs, and almost 5 million were created. So that is certainly going in the right direction. The Wall Street Journal, I think this quote really sums it up. It said, US job growth surged last month, underscoring the economy's capacity for a quick rebound if businesses continue to reopen and consumers regain confidence. But a recent coronavirus spike, however, could undermine trends captured in this job report. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that obviously it's a tenuous recovery. We need to make sure that it continues in the right direction. But it is having an effect on parts of the market. And what the bears of the real estate world are right now are saying, unemployment's high, there's job insecurity, and forbearances are going up. And for those not familiar with what forbearances are, it was part of the CARES Recovery Act that brought all the unemployment, extra unemployment benefits, whatnot. Part of that CARES Act by the national government was the government saying, hey, any government-backed loan, Freddie, Fannie Mae, anything that was government-backed, those homeowners have forbearance periods. And there's all kinds of rules of double 180-day periods, et cetera, of not having to pay your mortgage, and that balance being put up back onto the back end of the mortgage in a non-interest bearing balance, and all kinds of things. But basically it was a not forgiveness, but a delay in a period of having to pay your mortgage. And obviously that's a sign that people are struggling. But what's been interesting, and then actually that peaked at about 10% back in March. So those quickly went to about 10% of all the mortgages in America, or government-backed mortgages, were in forbearance. And so the bears are saying, hey, if 10% of the mortgages are in forbearance, that's a sign of future foreclosures. The real estate market is going to be hit. The real difference is that the way this forbearance was done is different than in the past, and really gave people a kind of a penalty-free grace period. There was not a lot of reason not to take it as long as you were affected by COVID financially. But the other part of this is we're in a very different situation. Well, one, those forbearances are falling. So we peaked at 10% right away, but right now we're on about a 10-week streak where week over week, those forbearances have gone down. I think right now we're down to about 7 or 8% of loans in forbearance. But most importantly, homeowners have a lot of equity in their homes right now. And the reason this plays into it is because even if someone is behind in their mortgage, if they have a lot of equity in their home, they're not going to be willing to throw the keys back to the bank like they did in 2007 if they have 20% equity. And the stat that I've got here on the right was put together by a data analytics firm, Black Knight, and they said that 77% of mortgages, so 3/4 of mortgages, have at least 20% equity in their home. So if someone has a $400,000 home and they have $80,000 in equity, even if they're in forbearance and they lose their job, they're not going to throw the keys back at the bank if they have $80,000 on the table. So there's a lot more cushion. Homeowners over the last 10 years have been a lot more responsible and not using their home as that ATM and always pulling equity out, like they did in the early 2000s. So homeowners are much healthier as far as equity in their home. And, that's definitely in the favor of future stability. So Black Knight, basically the quote they have here, and excuse my mouse running around, is on the screen, is the high level of equity provides option for homeowners, policymakers, mortgage investors, and servicers in helping to avoid downstream foreclosure activity and default related losses. All they're trying to say is that there's more options than ever for homeowners. They've got a lot of equity in the home, and they don't foresee a wave of foreclosures or hidden listings that are going to be hitting the market at distressed prices. The reason I'm talking about this so much is because this is also a turning point. And what's unprecedented about this crisis is that it has redefined the importance of home for people. Mark Fleming, who's chief economist of First American, has a quote here. A lot of similar quotes from CEOs of all the real estate companies that are coming out right now. And this one says, as we navigate the unprecedented impact of COVID-19, home has taken on an added significance, and there are signs that home ownership remains one of the main tenets of the American dream. And if you don't believe me, these two stats might help reinforce that. So the one on the left here, they both look the same, but they say a little bit different things. The one on the left here is number of showings compared to year over year. So this shows that the first couple months, this is showings of people looking at homes. First couple months of 2020 were off to the races. It was a record-setting year, and then it absolutely fell off that cliff, and showings went down by about 50% year over year. No one was out looking at homes. People were trying to grapple with what COVID meant to their life. We still didn't have good parameters on how to operate safely as an industry. But what this showed is that even in the teeth of the scale, in April, things were still very tenuous. Showing activity started rebounding very, very quickly. Only took about a month from the bottom to end early May, where showing activity was the same as 2019. And now we're off to the races, and showing activity across the nation is up anywhere from about 20 to 40% year over year. So buyers are out in full force buying homes right now. And I think COVID and the effect it's had on people's lifestyle plays directly into this. The one on the right here is a housing market recovery index. This was derived by the Association of Realtors, National Association, and they were trying to grasp what COVID meant to housing as well. So they put together this that had 4 components: demand, supply, price, and time on market. And basically you mashed all four of those together, and they created a baseline. And basically what this shows is that we're basically fully recovered from any COVID effects on housing. The only reason they don't show it as fully recovered is because one of those metrics, supply, we don't have enough homes to sell, and that's driving, and that's what's keeping it from as much volume as we were last year. But the others, the demand, the price, the time on market, those all show a very, very strong market here in 2020. And this, unfortunately, fortunately, up to you, all leads back to Bend, directly to Bend. We are in the crosshairs of this trend. And Realtor Magazine put out a poll, and it says here, nearly 30% of the respondents living in a high density urban area say that the pandemic is prompting them to want to move by the end of the year. And that's double the rate of the people wanting to move who live in rural areas. And the graph on the right underscores this. And not only the people that are wanting to move, where they want to move, they're wanting to move to rural areas and suburban areas, and urban is absolutely out of favor. And so I'm seeing this. I'm also talking, I'm in these mastermind groups with some agents around the nation. And I was talking to the #2 agent in all of Seattle 2 days ago. And she said that it's, the condos in downtown Seattle are not selling at all. And the developers are extremely scared, but yet the suburbs and the outlying communities and the islands around there are getting 30 to 40 offers on the house. So they're seeing what we're seeing here, and Bend very much falls into a rural suburban escape from these urban areas. And I think this is best summed up by some of the articles that we're seeing in the paper. And I'm just going to read a few of these headlines to let them settle in, and just so that you can understand kind of what we're seeing in the market. The first headline here: Americans leave large cities for suburban areas and rural towns. New York Times saying America's big cities were already losing their allure. What happens next? San Francisco Gate, there's two headlines here that absolutely capture what the agents on the ground are seeing. Quote, "I'm finally leaving," unquote. Stories of Bay Area residents moving because of the pandemic. And they put out a survey. 2 out of 3 tech workers would leave San Francisco permanently if they could work remotely. Here's one more. San Francisco's continue leaving for more comfortable lives elsewhere as rental prices plunge. Report: more people are selling homes, moving out of Seattle. So what's so interesting about what we're seeing right now is traditionally when we were correlated with these feeder city markets, so that when Seattle and San Francisco prices went up, what we got is overflow from those cities. People the cost of living would get a little high, they would have an exit, they would make some money, and then they would move to Bend. What we're seeing right now is it's inverted. We're inversely correlated in the sense that when these cities are out of favor, it's driving up prices and demand here in Bend. And all these people that are fleeing these big cities, they all know about us. So let's talk about what's happening in Bend. So I'm seeing a poll that we just put up here, and 85% of you think that the migration patterns that we're discussing right now are going to, let me see, they are going to think that these are going to grow, these trends are only going to continue to grow stronger in the future. And I agree. So here, let's look at some stats. I don't want to get too wonky on charts, but I think it helps tell a picture. So the Bend housing sales year over year, the average sales price is up about almost 10%. Median pricing is down, is a little bit lower than that. But this is a little bit of a lagging indicator because this tells the story of what's sold. And what we want to also do is look at some indicators of what, where we're going to be at in the coming months and years. And I think one of the good ones that we can talk about and talk about where we're going is housing sales. Now, this is a absolutely dramatic graph. It is an absolute J hook up there at the end. What do they call it? The hockey stick. This shows the amount of pending sales, and this is using a 12-month average. But we went from basically selling 200 to 400 homes a month in Bend to over 1,000 to 1,500 homes a month. And our adjusted average annually right now is over 4,500 homes a month, when only 2-3 months ago we were somewhere in the mid 3,000s. So we've had an absolutely seismic shift in the amount of homes that are selling in Bend, and we are absolutely seeing this on the ground. Now, this is the inverted side of this. This is inventory of available homes. This shows months of available homes that are available in Bend, and we're down 77%. So traditionally, about 6 months of housing inventory makes for a balanced market, which means that if no new homes come on the market, it'll take about 6 months to sell everything on the market. Right now, end of July, we fell to 1.7 months, and we're falling even further. And this came, and this drop off in the amount of homes that were for sale came in a time where we already had a historic shortage of homes per capita than we've ever had in recorded history, not only in Bend, but nationwide. So we came into this in a housing shortage, and this extra demand that has come in recently has made it almost a crisis for the amount of homes that are available. One of the things that are in buyers' favors at this point, which is kind of adding a whole different dynamic to this market, are interest rates. So interest rates are squarely in buyers' favor, or they're an advantage to buyer, not necessarily against seller. That helps actually drive demand. We are at absolutely historic lows, and this ties in with, you know, the bond market and the treasury and all that. But basically, the fiscal, you know, policy that's been put into place to spur this recovery has helped drive this, where we're now seeing interest rates, 30-year fixed rates at just over 3%. And anyone that's been in housing for a while knows that these are absolutely silly numbers. You know, long-term inflation of money is 2 to 3%. So in the big picture of things, it's, you know, a financial analyst is almost going to look at this as free money, because you're lending money at the same rate as inflation, which allows you know, buyers to, despite some of these pricing, you know, changes, it allows them to kind of dollar cost average and buy into this with security, because you don't buy a house all at once, you buy it monthly payments if you're getting a loan. And when you talk 3% interest rates compared to 4, 5, 6% interest rates, your mortgage payments are 40 or 50% less than what they would be in a higher interest rate environment. So despite the pressures that we've got, there's still good reasons to buy if you're lending money. And it's helping offset some of the pain of these price increases that we're seeing. And so I'm looking at a poll here really quickly, and it says, as demand for Bend housing goes up, are you more or less likely to buy? And majority of you are saying less or no change. And then it says, as demand for housing prices go up, are you more likely to sell? That one's a little more balanced between more or less. But obviously, this is a headwind for buyers, these trends. We're also seeing it as a little bit of a headwind for sellers too, because sellers don't necessarily have a place to go. It's easy to sell your home right now, but what do you replace it with? I was actually just speaking with a mechanic who was working on my truck today, and he said, you know, he sold his house in one day. He negotiated a lease back so that he's got plenty of time to live in it while he shops. But he's missed out on the last 4 or 5 homes that he's looked at, and he's all of a sudden starting to get panicked that he won't be able to re-enter the market. And so that's a bit of a challenge. So, you know, let's go over some of my takeaways for how I see this. This is a bit of a kind of a trifecta, where we have low mortgage interest rates, a pandemic-driven migration patterns, and limited housing inventory. And it's really come together to create a little bit of a housing availability crisis here in Bend. I think to put it any other way is inaccurate. And this is something that we're going to need to address. And let's talk about that housing shortage and pricing. And so Bend really doesn't have the ability to respond to this market quickly enough in the shorter midterm by adding enough housing through construction and development. Some of the bigger cities in Boise that have low barriers to entry, cheap land, you know, development codes that allow, you know, quick development of land, at a lower cost that doesn't have to be part of urban growth boundary expansions and master plans for cities that involve transportation and parks and all those things. And we're simply handcuffed in Oregon of not being able to quickly ramp up. Plus our supply, our labor pool here is tighter for building these homes. And this seismic shift and pandemic wave of migration into Bend is something that we're not going to be able to react to in the short term, and is going to have an effect on pricing. I'm not saying it's a one-way up, but what I am saying is this is definitely giving a lot of support or downside support to housing prices, and we're just not going to be able to meet this with a lot of supply. And historically, supply and oversupply is generally what drives housing corrections. It's not the stock market, it's not the economy, and I've gone over that in some of my past webinars. In 3 of the last 5 recessions, housing prices went up. So it's one of these things that the housing market always kind of marches to its own drum or whatever. And historically, oversupply is what causes crashes. And I just don't think oversupply is something that we're going to see here, Ben, in the near future. So this migration, trend is important. So even though our feeder cities, San Francisco, Seattle, LA, will rebound when this pandemic subsides. It happened in 9/11. If anyone remembers, cities were very much out of favor in real estate for a year or two after 9/11. But then people realized that there are a lot of great attributes to living in the city. The dynamic job environment, et cetera, are very attractive. These cities will recover. But the overarching longer term trends of city flight and the mass adoption of remote working will place continued pressure on Bend's housing stock. And so, I don't want to, be too quippy with kind of, how to operate in this, but here are some kind of general rules and trends. And then what I'd like to do is open up for some questions. I'd love to hear anything that you have to talk about today. But let's talk about ways buyers can navigate this market. One is simply know the market data so you can act quickly. For those that are trying to purchase either through self-representation or poor representation, it's not going to work. This market is simply moving too quickly. Any listing, house, land that is well priced, well marketed is going to be gone, and it's going to be gone in short order. And if you're paying attention, weeks or even days at a time, you're already behind the curve. You've got to be pre-qualified, ready to go, ready to look at that home first day, if not ready to do an offer. There's still some great purchases to be had out there, but you've got to be highly attuned and highly represented. Interest rates are in your favor. They are providing security. And really, the people that I saw get in trouble with real estate in the crash in the early 2000s or 2008 were over leveraged. Their monthly payments were too high, and they were highly leveraged, where basically they had very little equity in the home. Anyone that had equity in their home, had monthly payments that they knew they could afford, had a reserve to cover those, sailed through that just fine, and the market has more than recovered any losses that were on those properties. And these interest rates really provide additional security. If we were in a high interest rate environment with these dynamics, I would be doing a little bit more head scratching and giving caution to our buyers. But I think this interest rate's kind of the icing on the cake that makes it a reasonable buying opportunity. As well, obtain your pre-approval. If you're going in to make an offer on a house and you're not pre-approved with a loan, sellers won't consider your offer. And really buy for the long term. Real estate investments are always done best over time, and now it underscores the importance of doing that. And for sellers, now for as much dynamic as there is right now for price appreciation and limited inventory, price fairly. And the market is not reacting to overpriced homes. And what's odd about this market is that we're seeing some homes sell very quickly and over asking price, but then other homes that are slightly too high, as soon as this market rejects them, and this market doesn't take months or years to reject, if a market's been on for weeks, all of a sudden, a buyer that comes into those markets saying, well, if that home, everything else is selling in a day and that home's been on for a month, what's wrong with it? and it kind of gets that brown banana on the shelf effect. And so make sure that you're pricing correctly. And if you priced it a little low, the market generally corrects that. So, I always think of pricing low as like trying to hold a bobber or something underwater. And if the market demand is truly there, when you let that go, it's going to push it up to market value, either through multiple offers, or for me, it's not always about the final dollar on the purchase price. It's all the other dynamics. You get to choose, look through the offers that you're getting the one that's the most secure, the least amount of contingencies, has other, items that are in your favor, allowing a lease back, things like that. And it allows you to secure a more solid buyer. Number two, real estate is not always a highly liquid investment. There are times where it's very difficult to sell real estate, and this is not one of those, and it's a great exit opportunity. So, don't look past this. If you need to be out of a property in the next 1 to 2 years, we've got an open window here, and it's a great time to exit. Number three, this market is nuanced. Know your micro market. Every neighborhood's different. Every price level's different. What we're seeing in the $300,000 to $500,000 category is absolutely different than what we're seeing in the $1 million to $1.5 million category. What we're seeing in the Tethero market is very different than the Aubrey Butte market, than what's in the Murata, the Northeast market and the Southeast market. Everything's a little bit different, and you've got to be absolutely dialed in what's happening. And now, sophisticated online marketing is hypercritical. These are online buyers. They are buying sight unseen, and they're buying quickly, and they're buying digitally. And if you don't have a sophisticated marketing program put together that goes beyond video and photos and SEO and pay-per-click, targeting and all those things, and lead integration and capture and drips and all those things, you're not giving yourself full exposure when so many people are looking remotely. So looking forward, here's a poll I've got over here. This was done by Gallup poll, and for 7 years in a row, the respondents to this poll said that real estate far and away was the best long-term investment. Obviously up for debate. There's all types of ways to analyze investment returns and opportunity costs and all that. But real estate in the long term is really where it shines. And we must learn from our history, and we avoid the pitfalls of speculation, emotional buying, especially for the short term, in times where the data and what we're seeing is so unprecedented. But at the end of the day, one of the times my brother visited from Montana, I toured around Bend, and he said Bend is an absolute blue chip stock. And I agree with him. And we have so many strong attributes, from robust job growth to regional air traffic to simple quality of life, that's going to serve us well into the future. So I'm not nervous for buyers or sellers in this market if you've got a plan. So I'm feeling, very good about it, despite it being as, dynamic as we, it is right now. But with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions. And then if we don't have any immediate questions right here, I really appreciate you all for coming on today. But if we don't have any questions, you feel free to put those in on the remarks, either on Facebook or here. We'll respond directly back to you, and we'll go from there. So it looks like we've got answers to all the polls here, and we'll respond to those as well. But I think I'm going to just leave it at that, and thank everybody for their time here on this sunny Thursday, and encourage everyone to go get outside and enjoy, enjoy this wonderful environment that we have, and there's reasons everyone's moving up here. Let's not forget what a great place we've got here. So with that, thank you, and we're always accessible. We're here to help. Take care.